The path to your next big career move goes through Canada. The 12-month full-time MBA program at Queen's University's Smith School of Business features a proven team-based experiential curriculum built around the exact set of skills that top employers seek. The results speak for themselves. 98% of the class of 2021 accepted an offer for their dream role within 3 months of graduation. Listeners of the Touch MBA podcast can receive a complimentary virtual consultation by visiting yoursmithmba.com/touchmba. That's yoursmithmba.com/touchmba.
Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
It's all about the network. That's what we hear all the time, right? About getting an MBA. It's not just for the business education, for improving your economic opportunities. It's about the network. It's about who you meet at school and who you stay in touch with after school. Well, in this week's episode, I speak with Nicolle Lee, who is a second-year student at Wharton. And we walk through her pre-MBA journey to when she was applying for MBAs, to her first year and to her second year up to now. And we talk about how she has built relationships at each step of her journey. The network and the relationships you make during business school don't just happen during your MBA. They happen way before and way after. I really enjoyed this conversation with Nicolle because she really, shares a lot of how, for example, she honed in on her goal to pivot to real estate investment banking, how she was able to land an internship with Morgan Stanley and eventually an offer as well. We really get into the weeds, but I think it's very illuminating actually, and could serve as a case study or even a preview of what you'll be doing at your dream business schools. She had very clear goals for entering the program, and you could see how she went about accomplishing those. Remember that at touchmba.com, we offer free school selection help. If you're having trouble shortlisting schools or deciphering the dozens of websites and trying to figure out which program really fits you best and where you're competitive at, go to touchmba.com. Upload your resume there, tell us your career goals, and we'd be happy to give you some free help over there. Now, let's get straight to my candid conversation with Nicolle Lee. My next guest is finishing up her second year at Wharton, where she is majoring in real estate and finance. Nicolle Lee, welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. Great to have you here.
Hi, Darren. Thanks for having me. So great to be here.
Yeah, so we haven't had a student on from Wharton in a while, so I'm really curious to dive into your journey, and I'd love to hear your insights about the program, and I'm sure our audience would love to hear them too. Wharton is obviously, one of the most popular programs out there. But maybe we could first kind of start with your pre-MBA journey. And I'm wondering if you could just take us back to before you got your MBA, like why did you want to get one and which schools were you looking at the time?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And just for context, I'm just going to give a little bit of background on myself, might help frame the question. So prior to business school, I was working in financial services for 5 years. And on the job, I had experience in investment banking, venture capital, strategy, but I was also really passionate about community service and giving back. So for example, I ran a volunteering program at Voya Financial in addition to my full-time job and spent nearly all of my free time outside of work on affordable housing projects in New York City. And I realized that I needed to follow this passion that I had, and it wasn't necessarily within the industry or role I was at. So that's when I decided that I wanted to go to graduate school. But at the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to get the master's in public policy or the MBA. And so I decided that I would apply to Harvard Kennedy School. And in parallel, I also applied to the East Coast business schools that were affiliated with the 3-year dual degree program. So I applied to Tuck, MIT, HBS, and Wharton. And then when I got into HKS, I thought about, okay, what business school program would best complement the MPP? And so I decided to enroll at Wharton because that's where I also received the most merit scholarship money. And it just made a ton of sense for what the HKS MPP was offering.
Oh, so are you doing the HKS MPP as well?
I decided not to go there. So that's why I've structured my second year at Wharton to complement the real estate program. And it was based just on personal reasons. But, the origin of me even applying to graduate school was structured around this public policy
Interesting.
passion. Yeah.
Wow. So that means that they must have really sold you. I mean, in addition to what sounds like a really great scholarship that, for you to just do Wharton MBA when your original impetus, right, was to go to the Kennedy School. Well, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what else attracted you to the program and what you found helpful to get you in, right? I mean, it's a tough program to get in, nevertheless, to get a scholarship.
It definitely is a tough program to get into. I think what is interesting about Wharton is that it's a very collaborative environment. And so what I found is my personality almost thrives in this environment. And I didn't even know that going in. It's a very friendly place, despite, the reputation it might have. I found that people are extremely willing to help. And I think based on my career goals of going into real estate investment banking, Wharton has its own real estate program, real estate major. And so it just made sense. And it also just played out where the school wanted me just as much as I wanted them. And so it was more of like a fit thing at the end of the day. And I think in terms of your question around what do you think helped make the difference in getting in? I really approached the graduate school application process through a growth mindset. And so I was constantly thinking about ways I could develop personally and improve throughout the process. So a good example is I used the essay writing exercises as opportunities to grow personally and share my life story and career goals with my friends who had agreed to help edit the essays. And through that process, I got into Wharton, but I also got extremely close with the people that agreed to help me. And so there was always this overarching goal of I'm going to personally develop and build these relationships. And so just thinking about the process from a perspective of it would be great to get into a top MBA program or a top MPP program, but this is actually a journey to discover who you are.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about, because I think maybe I gave too quick of an intro and kind of glossed over your past, because that's going to really frame, right, your goal, which you mentioned, of real estate investment banking and your experience. I mean, can you just kind of walk us through, I can mention them, but it's probably better if you do. So kind of which companies you were working for, right? And then how you kind of framed that career goal essay, because that's generally a common essay for most business schools.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I had mentioned before that I had 5 years of work experience in financial services. And so I started off my career in investment banking for financial institutions. I then went into corporate development at a small community bank and spent most of my career prior to Wharton at Voya Financial, where I started off in their corporate venture capital fund and then moved into different functions because I wanted to be a very holistic business-minded manager before I went to business school. And so I really had that goal of getting leadership experience, being very well-rounded, and that would help prepare me to be the best classmate that I could be. And so when I applied to business school, I had this career goal of switching into real estate, but I really pitched all the existing skills I had. I was already pretty good at business, and I knew functionally I'm strong. It's just this industry knowledge that's what I'm missing.
Right. How deep, for example, did you dive into Wharton's like real estate center and their courses and their professors? I mean, were you very specific in terms of putting forth a plan? Like, all right, I'm pretty strong functionally, but industry wise, there's a lot I need to learn. Like, I'm just curious how you went about that.
Yeah, so in the career goal essay, I was very direct about what I wanted. I said, I'm going into real estate investment banking and I'm targeting, Morgan Stanley, Goldman, whatever firm, like explicitly by name. And this is how I'm going to get there. And I explicitly said, these are the classes, these are the professors that I'm going to make relationships with. And I'm going to take advantage of everything at Wharton. And you can count on me to really do a good job at getting where I need to be.
Right. Right. And then so the sort of community things you were doing outside of work, like, did you also bring those into your essay and your interviews?
Yeah. So the long-term goal is eventually to end up in some more policy-based role. And so I had also said, like, here are all the other real estate classes that are more economics-based or politics-based that I'm also going to take to facilitate that long-term goal. So I think it's like dividing the essay into, here's the short-term goal of like the immediate career I'm going to get because these admissions officers care about, the metrics that the school is reporting out. But then also you can count on me to be this inspirational person moving forward that's going to contribute to society. And here are the different things that I plan to do with my life.
Yeah. No, that's crystal clear, crystal clear. And for our listeners and even myself, like, can you explain kind of what Voya does? Like, what's their position?
They are an asset management firm that helps individuals retire better. And so we have really three business arms. It's the retirement business arm, employee benefits, and investment management. And so with the insurance business, there was a corporate venture capital fund that I was originally hired to invest from.
I see. Yeah. And then in terms of the interview, I think that's a big source of worry and stress for many Wharton applicants. Like, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience and kind of what you learned going through that?
Yeah, so the interview process is the team-based discussion. And what's interesting is it's meant to model the way the classroom is structured. So it's supposed to be collaborative and you're supposed to demonstrate characteristics that you'd want to have in a Wharton student. And I think my tip that I received and that I think really worked well was just to be yourself. If you're a fairly social and logical person, I think the TBD will probably be enjoyable and fun even. I know that sounds like, how could an interview be fun? But I had a ton of fun and was cracking jokes throughout the process. And I think it's just getting comfortable with conversation. And if you've been in a role where you're facilitating meetings, it shouldn't be too difficult of an exercise. There were a couple of things I did to prepare beforehand. So the prompts are distributed before you interview. And so during my admissions cycle, we were asked to structure a conference around Wharton's entrepreneurship agenda. And so I spent a few hours just looking up who were all of the famous entrepreneurs who got their start at Wharton, what were some of the resources like. We have this beautiful building called Tangent Hall that it's essentially a venture lab. And so just really understanding the entrepreneurship ecosystem at Wharton, and that's doing your homework. Then there's like practice. So I also was going to improv acting classes in New York at the time. And so I asked some of the people I'd met through that process to actually help mimic the TBD. And so just like getting your reps in, being prepared for anything that might come up during the TBD.
You say like social and logical people will be a bit easier, right, to go through that process, so they might enjoy it. Did you observe your fellow applicants like struggling to sort of balance talking and listening and not like taking up all the airtime or taking too little airtime? Because I think that's kind of a big concern people have, is that they do all this prep and then they barely get to squeeze in a few comments. Or is it pretty easy to just kind of find enough space to do so?
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag and it's a little bit luck-based. So that's why you have to be prepared for any type of situation. We had a situation where, so everyone in my TBD got into Wharton, but there was one individual who probably was a bit too eager coming into it.
Yeah.
And so what everyone else did was kind of like relax, and the energy levels in the room kind of went down as everyone else tried to make that other person feel relaxed. So I think like you're interviewing with pretty high EQ people. And so you kind of have to rely on the people next to you to get a sense for how to react. I think it's just being adaptive to whatever situation you're in. And psychologically, at the end of the day, the student admissions fellows that are evaluating the TBD, they're normal people. They're, second year students at Wharton. And so it also just helps reminding yourself that it's supposed to be a friendly interview environment. They want you to do well. You're with your peers.
Yeah, no, I love that. Like, I love that idea of just like managing the tone and kind of energy and vibe, right? Like no one really says that, but that's a huge part of business. And of course the interview. I'm wondering if you have any other kind of stories or things that stuck out from you from, applying to all these schools and even like non-MBA programs, if you want, that you feel could benefit our audience. Cause yeah.
I think that you want to just take every opportunity when you're on campus to meet people. Like my number one goal was like, yeah, maybe I might get into the school, maybe I won't, but while I'm here, I'm going to make the most of the opportunity. And so I met a ton of people on different campuses that I'm still in touch with. And it's just like, you're constantly networking. The process starts as soon as even before you hit campus, just have those conversations and you're building relationships. That's what business is all about.
Yeah. And we're going to dive into that, I think, in this next part of the conversation. But I want to highlight again, kind of what you're saying, because I don't think I've had a guest who's like explicitly said it the way you have, in that, to make this about obviously personal growth, but about really building relationships along the way through the entire process. It's not just about, okay, I got into this great business school, now I'm going to start like building relationships, right? It's just a personal philosophy of yours, clearly, that you want to meet people, help them out, stay in touch through your entire business life or career, right? And this is just one part of that, it sounds like to me.
Yeah. And I think like it's a really wonderful life philosophy to just build community wherever you are, especially in times like these. I think it's just a funner way to get through life.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Does take the effort though. It does take energy and effort and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about how you've made the most of your time at Wharton. Now, I will link to a few articles you've been in. Clear Admit featured you, and that's a great article, which I'll link to in the show notes. But I kind of am curious if you could take me through your journey. Like, it sounds like you had very clear plans that you detailed in your essay. And I'm kind of curious about what you actually ended up doing, which parts of that plan were really effective for you, which parts of the plan weren't, and what sort of things did you stumble onto that were also very helpful? Yeah.
Yeah. So going into Wharton, I used my essays as a starting point to build that plan. And I reassessed as I was enrolling and after the summer, trying to determine what I actually wanted to do. My plan was really threefold. So the first was to explore real estate as a new career path. The second was to develop personally over the 2 years that I was in graduate school. So I set out a goal to learn how to ski and surf, which I hadn't had the opportunity to do as a child, and really just wanted to do these activities while I had the time. And number three is pursue opportunities in social impact, diversity, women empowerment. And I think like all three were accomplished, but I think like there were a ton of learnings along the way. So in my first year, I spent the vast majority of my time working and making the switch into real estate. I would say it was extremely career and professionally focused. So I was still working at my prior employer, Voya Financial, because
Really?
yeah,
How were you able to do that?
putting in maybe 20 to 30 hours a week on top of being a full-time student
Oh,
and recruiting.
So, I mean, I don't think I've ever heard that. Like, why did you want to keep working for Voya?
Well, first of all, there was like this really great opportunity. Like they were like, this is again like an ongoing relationship. We value you as an employee, and we have this opportunity for you to stay on because we were going through a massive organizational transformation. And so we were restructuring the business, reinvesting in growth opportunities. And I just wanted to see the project through because I thought it would just be valuable for my long-term career. But, like being a full-time student and working, I don't think would have been feasible if we were not in virtual classes. I think because of the virtual format of business school in 2020 and 2021, it was actually an opportunity to do more with my time. Like I still got a ton out of business school, but then I was like, well, this is not fun. I can't travel as much, but what can I do with that extra time? I can, invest in my professional career for another year. And so the opportunity cost for business school was actually lower in my first year. And so that also meant though that I had to hustle when I was, actually networking with real estate professionals and trying to explore this new career path. And so I just took a ton of classes and I realized that I really love sales, marketing within real estate, and just talking to people. I think that I was just so eager to get involved in the real estate community at Wharton that I just signed up for every possible thing. But I think I could have been like a little more deliberate about like particularly the case competitions. I'd done over 4 of them in my first year. And I think that was perhaps overdoing it. I met a ton of people from other schools at UPenn, which was extremely valuable. But like the Urban Land Institute case competition, I recall doing that while I was traveling, and it was just so much work. And I wasn't being like the best team member that I could possibly be, versus in the impact investing in commercial real estate case competition, I was not only passionate about it, like I wanted a place. Like I knew that I wanted to learn more about Philadelphia and the site where we were developing our proposal. I wanted to understand the transit because I worked here and I lived here. And so I think that when you're really passionate about the case competition or project or whatever you're doing, the payoff will probably be there. But if you're kind of just like going through the motions, it's not good from like a learning perspective, and you're not being a good team member. And so I just kept doing these case competitions, building relationships with development firms like Hines and investment firms like Invesco, because at the time I wasn't, 100% sure if I wanted to do real estate investment banking. But it was when I had gotten more involved with the real estate center, the Zell Lurie Center, and had a couple of coffee chats with managing directors from the real estate groups within these investment banks. I was like, okay, I think this is what I want to do. I'm like very impressed by how intelligent these people are. They know all parts of the industry. Functionally, I think I'd be good at the job. I think I'm going to do what I set out to do. And so I just went for real estate investment banking, aligned myself with students that would help me with recruiting, whether it was through the real estate club or the finance club. And I think that I just took advantage of all of the networking and social events in order to build my professional career. And so that's my first year. It was, as you can tell, it was very professionally focused.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. Before we get into your second year, I actually have so many questions on what you just said.
Yeah.
So you said that when you started, you just threw yourself into as much as you could, right? And
exactly.
So help me provide this general overview. So there were case competitions, the real estate center, there was the real estate club and finance club. There was outreach to real estate firms, right? Am I missing something? Classes.
Yes.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
I mean,
Yeah.
is that the general, like those were kind of your options, or did I miss something there?
No, I think those were the different levers to pull on in order to immerse yourself. And you also have your career advisors and specific chats with professors who are able to guide you, which was also helpful. But I think that I kind of just pulled on all of these levers at the same time because I knew time was limited. And I just was so excited to be on campus, honestly, and take advantage of everything.
And then for those case competitions, could you give our listeners a taste of like how much work that entails? Like
Yes.
how long and what's involved?
So within the real estate case competitions, there are different skill sets within each case competition. So the ULI one is really based around design. And so you want to make sure that your team is equipped with design skills. And so we worked with the Weitzman the UPenn Weitzman students.
Who are they? Just Weitzman students are?
Like the design urban development students that would help build out our case competition. And then we had 2 Wharton students who would work on the financials. For that, I think like you're really depending on those design students to build the thing. And so I didn't have strong relationships with those students to begin with, but it was very involved, and you just spend maybe 100+ hours building.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So it's 100+ hours to build, to build your case, right?
Exactly.
And then there's what about the actual presentation of it, and how does that work?
So for the ULI design case competition, there are thousands of applicants. So the odds of you placing are and it's not like the process is more about learning, but I think also if you're like not passionate about it, the payoff just might not be there. And so we didn't even pass that first filter of like getting to the top 100. And so I think like for me, it was a good learning opportunity because it was a little bit of I would say like a mini failure in that like I wasn't putting everything I had into it, but it was still really interesting from a design perspective. But then you have like private equity case competitions where, okay, now I have classmates that I know will be really good at this, and we could probably place second or third, if not first. And so those are actually more like constrained by time. And so it's one weekend, you have like 5 hours to build the case. It's much more efficient, and you're getting in front of like very interesting private equity professionals. The case competition that I enjoyed the most was impact investing. And so that also was like 100+ hours. But because I was building in a city that I understood very well, I was like learning a ton. I literally visited the site where we were proposing we build our project. And also just like a good opportunity to network with the people in Philadelphia.
And so like, let's say for the PE case, right? You guys finish high. What is the payoff? I mean, in terms of like that exposure you get to the judges or the organization hosting it, like what is the payoff from doing really well, like performing well in a case competition?
So for the private equity case competition, those typically allow you to get in front of firms and they'll offer you a first round interview. So that's across like private equity or investment management at Wharton. And so I had a friend who was offered a first round interview without even having applied to those jobs, just because he had been a part of that process. And then there's also a cash component. And so we placed first for the University
of Miami. Oh, congrats. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the impact investing in commercial real estate case competition. And so I think every year it's around like 20 grand is the total pool. Yeah. And you just divvy it up across your team.
Nice. And so it's also similar for the impact investment case, like you establish relationships with those companies. Is it similar? Or?
For that one, it was more because it's social impact driven. I don't know if they're like that part of the industry is fully, professionally developed in the same way that real estate private equity is. There's still exposure. Like I think our judges were from Hines, but it's not as like, like Invesco is sponsoring this and you're going to get like an interview.
Right. No, that's great. So I think that'll be really helpful to our listeners, right? Because then through your experience, they know like to really be strategic with these case competitions. And of course, it's great to learn too, but that's a lot of time, right, that you spent. And then I had one more question before we get into your second year. Can you talk to me a bit more about the clubs and kind of how important they are at Wharton? And I know at other schools, they're a great conduit to meet alumni. And I'm wondering if it's similar at Wharton and how that plays out.
I've found that the clubs are extremely helpful to network with your peers and alumni, particularly in real estate, because there's an affinity to the industry. If you're a Wharton alum who's been in real estate, you want to keep coming back to campus and giving back. I think like clubs in general at Wharton are just extremely important because it's such a social environment. And so it's like you want to just be a part of these clubs that you're passionate about because you want to meet like-minded peers. So whether that's in real estate or technology, whatever it is, you just want to like make sure you're involved in your first year so that you're able to meet other people who can then, share their networks.
And I mean, what was that like the first year over Zoom too? Like a club event over Zoom?
Definitely different from how it is in person. It's almost a different universe. I think
right?
Yeah, it was.
I can't actually imagine it. I mean, because I've been a part of a lot of clubs, right? And it's like such a big part of that is the handshakes and just meeting people and like, assessing their vibe and getting along with different types of people. So I can't imagine doing that in a virtual environment.
And it almost encouraged me to go out of my way to reach out and be more social. So we'd meet virtually, but then I'd follow up and say, hey, I want like a one-on-one drink or coffee with you. And I was more like, I think this happened with a lot of my classmates. We were just more aggressive about meeting other people. And that actually allowed us to build really deep relationships and lifelong relationships, I think, because we've gone through something that's just so unique and special.
Yeah. Well, okay, take me through your second year. So I cut you off. So yeah.
So my second year, as I mentioned before, I got like this return offer over the summer. And I decided...
actually, so let's talk about your internship actually first before we get to your second year. So how did you go about applying for that? How did you find the opportunity? What are you doing?
So investment banking at Wharton is pretty structured. And then we have a separate real estate investment banking track. And so really, I didn't have to do any work other than follow the steps that Wharton had provided. It was really up to me to perform in the interviews. Like everything was on campus.
Wow.
I just had to perform well. And so what I did was I just created very deep networks of people that could help me perform well in the interviews, whether it was people at the firm or people at school. I just found people's profiles, resumes at school, and I said, look, you worked in equity research before, you're going to go work in banking. Let's partner up. I'm not your direct competition because I'm specializing in real estate. And so we actually like made each other better. And a lot of the people I prepared with were actually going to the same firm. So that was kind of like the work that happened beforehand.
I mean, give me a sense of scale here. Like when you say you built up this deep network, how many people are we talking about?
At school, I probably started with 50 people that I was just trying to meet.
Wow.
But then I kind of like vetted, like based on your prior work experience, have you worked in banking before? Like who's going to make me most technically competent in the interviews?
Totally.
And so I had 3 partners at the end, and we would drill 12 hours a day before the interviews.
How do you even drill 12 hours a day? Oh my God.
Some people were booking 17 hours. I think you're in an environment where people are extremely motivated. And so it helps you be motivated too.
That's amazing. Wow. Okay. I love that tip. So like trying to find those mutually beneficial relationships where you can feed off each other's knowledge and like quickly like get up to speed essentially, right?
And even during the interview process, just making sure that those lines of communication are open. Like if there's something like, oh, this Zoom room is going to have 5 people in the waiting room, just tiny little tips to help you throughout the process. So having friends is extremely crucial. And then like building relationships with the people that are ultimately going to interview you. There's a lot of work you can do beforehand before you get to the interview so that you feel more comfortable when it's game time.
I mean, can you give me an example of that? Like building relationships with the people who will be interviewing you? Like, how do you do that?
So it's really up to you to build those relationships. Like Wharton sets up the interviews, but there's nothing preventing you from reaching out directly to the bankers or if you're the consultants that are going to interview you. And so just send out cold emails, and I wouldn't just stop at that first call. Like I'd actually have 3 calls with each banker in that group to just like develop a personal relationship. And so like, even if you didn't perform perfectly in the interview, which I'm sure I didn't, at least there was like some basis for like, no, she's like passionate about this and she knows what she's talking about. Like we are going to use that reputation she's built up prior to the interview to justify giving the offer.
Okay, I'm fascinated by this idea. So how do you even get on their calendar, right? Is it because they're also Wharton people and so it's like a more friendly thing? Because I'm just thinking if I'm interviewing, say, 100 people and then someone's reaching out to me to like, get to know me for 3 hours before the actual interview, like I'm kind of like, well, I'm going to be interviewing you, right? Like, so, yeah, I don't know.
It's typically Wharton alumni, and they just want to recruit other Wharton alums. And so my group is, nearly 50% Wharton. It's like a numbers thing because there's such a strong community there. They're going to want to help you, and you're just well prepared even prior to walking into the interview.
That's amazing. That's great. I mean,
Yeah.
like, what do you talk to them about, like your interviewers about before? I mean, what would like one of those hours be about? I'm just curious.
So I just start off by like introducing myself. It's a normal conversation, but then I'll like ask them specifically, what are you working on? I saw this in the news. I saw you guys are like the financial advisors for this. You got to tell me, like, I'm just really interested. What is your area of specialty, expertise? And they're like really passionate about it. And then that gets you excited about what you're recruiting for.
Yeah. Got it. Wow. Okay. So how many firms were you targeting for your internship? And then, where did you end up going and why?
So I only targeted 4 firms, which probably was not, I think like just backing up a bit, like even business school wise, I typically like focus my efforts around 3 to 4 places and like have full confidence that one of them will work out. And so I targeted the top tier bulge bracket investment banks that had strong real estate groups. Ultimately, I chose Morgan Stanley because there was such a strong Wharton presence. And I felt very well supported prior to the interviews, during the interviews, and during the internship. And like my whole thing is about community and relationships. And it just like felt like I was well supported in a way that was familiar to my experiences at Voya Financial. And I know that's a very rare thing because I've had employers where that hasn't been the case. And so you really just got to trust that, like, if you found supportive people and a network of people that want you to do well, it's a rare thing.
Yeah. No. Oh, for sure. I agree 100%. So this internship at Morgan Stanley, was it just set to be for the summer? Because it looks like you're still working for them now, right? As an intern.
It's just for the summer.
Oh, it's just for the summer. Okay.
Just for the summer. Yeah.
So that's like 2 months, 2 or 3 months or so.
I think it's 10 weeks.
10 weeks.
And we spent a few weeks just training. And I think like that was really, they were showing right off the bat that they wanted to invest in you.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And
they're paying you full time in order to just learn, which is amazing.
Right. Right. And then what about getting that offer?
It was a fantastic feeling. The Wharton tradition is once you get the offer, you like go to Bonner's, which is a local bar down the street, and you celebrate with the other bankers who also got offers. It's just such again, like the experience of just going to Wharton and going through these things that come off as stressful. It's actually a very special and fun thing.
Yeah. I mean, would you have any advice to give our listeners about like making the most of that internship period to prove, you can really perform for the organization, or, in terms of like trying to lock down that final offer?
I think like really it depends like what role you're in, right? And so for investment banking, it was showing that you're technically competent, but also you're in this new position where you're managing a team of analysts and managing upwards to the vice president, managing director, et cetera. And so you just like want to manage all of these different relationships while also not over relying on the junior talent to demonstrate you're technically competent. It's just striking a right balance. And so I think what was interesting is I asked for deals where it was like slightly lighter staffed. So there was one, this is really telling of like how busy the team was during the summer because there were so many IPOs going on. But it was myself, a summer analyst, a VP, and an MD. And we were just running that lean for a number of different deals. And it just was a good opportunity to just show your technical competence. But then also there were other deals where it was like more fully staffed. And so you could run these different deals showing different skill sets.
And you kind of had a choice of where you were?
I think that like there's always an element of persuading whoever is assigning you. Like you just kind of have to figure out in the organization or whatever team you're on, like who's in charge of making these decisions and how do I ask for the things in a way that makes sense for the entire team. And so I just spoke with the staffer and I was like, look, like this is what I can offer. This is what everyone else is working on. I think it makes sense to be on these deals.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, did you ever find it challenging? Because like one thing I've learned from our conversation thus far is like you came in, you're very focused. I mean, of course, I'm sure you wanted to explore other things as well, but generally you had a very strong direction of where you wanted to go. You executed on that. You spent a lot of time pursuing all these different avenues, meeting all these different people, got your foot in the door at a great company, right? Like worked hard there, got your offer. But I saw that, 2% of Wharton people go into real estate, at least in the past few years.
Yeah.
And like, you're still kind of going against the herd. Like, I mean, I know you're doing investment banking, but still like, not many of you, right?
Was and that's like actually large
a source of strength, or was it a source of like, was it hard sometimes?
I think you have to know from a numbers perspective that at the time, there weren't as many seats as applicants. And so like being okay with that type of risk, like knowing like, okay, there's a chance I fail, but like, I'm so passionate about real estate. If this fails, I'm going to go find another real estate opportunity. And so I think it was just like doing it out of a place of passion for the industry more than anything else. I think I chose investment banking because like that's what I'm good at. And like it's a mix of passion plus like knowing my skill set. But everyone in the real estate community is deeply passionate about the asset class.
Huh. I mean, can you explain that? Like deeply passionate about real estate assets. Like what does that manifest as?
What I've found is like people, even if they go for like these corporate jobs and like real estate corporate jobs, they have side projects going on. So they're like trying to start a fund or they're developing in Chicago. Like for myself, it's like still being involved in affordable housing in New York City, in Los Angeles. Like we're not doing it for a paycheck. It's because we just really love learning about real estate and how it affects the people that are living inside of that real estate.
Yeah, got it. So take me through the second year now. So, I mean, when do you guys graduate again?
In May. So very soon.
Oh my gosh, it's so soon. Okay. So yeah, so the first year was, like you said, very work related, right? What has the second year been about for you? And kind of the same idea, like what has been a great use of time? What has been an obstacle, if any?
Sure.
Did you ever learn how to surf? All these things.
So over the summer during training, I learned how to surf, which is awesome. So we weren't working Saturdays, Sundays. So those first 2 weeks decided to learn how to surf then. But after my summer internship, I made the decision, a very hard decision, not to go to HKS. But I still wanted to create an experience around making a difference and impact. I knew UPenn very well at this point. And so I knew what classes and organizations and things I needed to do to get that social impact experience. And so one class that I took at Penn is in the nonprofit leadership program. And it was this class called Group Dynamics that has changed my life and my friends' lives. It's a class that teaches you about how group dynamics impact humans, access to resource, conflict, and it's really equipping students to have the skills to facilitate groups in a variety of settings, take up leadership positions, solve community conflicts. And I think that it was such a unique experience that demonstrates why Wharton is great, but also like there are all these other classes at Penn that you can take that also can complement the Wharton experience. On the real estate side of things, I have also been doing more field trips. So now that we're not in that COVID environment, I've been going on development tours in major cities. So I went to New York, DC. We saw projects that have been developed by Hines, Related, et cetera. And I even went on a joint outing with HBS and Wharton alums in Los Angeles touring affordable housing projects. So just getting more out on the field and really focusing on social impacts this year.
Yeah. And after you kind of locked up that offer, like, was that a big relief? And how did you feel after that?
It felt like I accomplished what tactically I had set out to do from school. I think like from a practical perspective, I wanted to do this in my short-term career. And now it was like, now it's time to develop personally in the next year. And how do I make sure that I'm a better leader holistically? Whether that means taking time for myself to learn how to ski or, building different relationships. I've conducted quite a few interviews with alums this year because I just want to learn, like, what was your career like? What are the learnings? And you'd be surprised. There are so many impressive Wharton alums that have agreed to this 30-minute interview. And I've just been so blown away by how accomplished these people are.
All right, let's dive into this 30-minute interview because I did see you've conducted quite a lot, right? I mean, what has it been? Like nearly 100 or maybe more than 100 of these?
At this point, probably more. Probably
more. So, this is one of the great benefits of being an MBA student, isn't it? Because if we're talking, Nicolle Lee 2 years from now, you're, XYZ at Morgan Stanley and so forth. Do you think you'd still be able to get that same audience? I mean, maybe, right? I don't know.
It's possible. I think that when you say you're a student and position it as like you want to learn or you need help, then people are more receptive to that. I'm taking a class called Understanding Careers, and there's literally an assignment that's like, conduct 10 interviews of people you find impressive. And so I reach out and I say, I have this assignment. I find you extremely impressive. Let's chat.
Right. That's just such a great excuse. I mean, I'm just thinking if someone reached out to me and was like, oh, I find you super impressive, I'd like to learn, about what you do. Be like, yeah, that's cool,
Yeah.
And so are those interviews really about like, okay, tell me about what you did here. Like, what did you learn from that? I mean, how much do you bring it back to yourself? Like, I'm kind of curious there in those coffee chats.
In my first year, I think the coffee chats were more around real estate and like I had this mission to get a job. And so it was more about like getting advice in a practical sense. I think when it's more like, I just find you impressive, I want to talk to you. I genuinely am just trying to like absorb information and life lessons. And I'll ask specifically, how did you get to where you were? Do you think you spent too long in a particular job? Were there any failures? Like things that I know I'm going to run up against 10 years from now. And I just want to know, like, what was your experience?
I love that. That's awesome. That's awesome. And then I'm sure maybe those conversations sparked intros to other people or like, I don't know, kind of interesting things to look at, right? Or stuff like, what has been a kind of surprising benefit of doing that?
So in a lot of instances, it was like a warm intro to a longer relationship. So one of the women that I had interviewed, she's going to be speaking at Wharton later this month, and she just invited me to her chat. And she was a CEO of Gymboree, Lucy Activewear, like very successful, currently working on a book. And I think like it's just like the beginning of a relationship that can go on for much longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Very cool. I did want to ask you kind of about that third bucket that you were interested in terms of social impact, diversity and inclusion, women, like empowerment, right? What resources are there for someone like you at Wharton, and like what have you found particularly like interesting or illuminating?
There are unlimited resources at Wharton for any specialty. I think in particular, if you're interested in social impact, the classes within the profit leadership program, you can just use your credits for those classes. And so there's another class called the Power Lab that is essentially an exercise around social dynamics and group dynamics. And it's just equipping you to work as a leader in the nonprofit sector. In terms of women empowerment, I've worked with the women in PSY, the Penn Women in Real Estate Club, to just spread information around real estate and how women, it's historically been very difficult for women to break into the industry, especially at the top tier. And so I like just encouraging other women to even apply for these roles in finance. You know, it's not a secret, there aren't a ton of women there. And so just like being involved in different volunteering opportunities where you're mentoring women. I'm still involved with Habitat for Humanity in New York City and currently serve on the Women's Build Council. And so just like also remembering to stay involved, give back, etc.
Yeah. Got you. And so, you know, looking back, you're almost done, right, with your experience. What should applicants who are like have Wharton in their sights as like one of their 4 or 5 schools, like what do they need to know about the culture there that might not be so obvious, like on the website and through all the sort of promotional materials the school puts out?
I think that Wharton has had a reputation for being a competitive finance school, but I've been really surprised at how that's not like a holistic or perfect picture of what's going on. There are a ton of entrepreneurs at Wharton. For example, my best friend here is running a climate tech company called TerraFuse that is calculating climate risk scores to using machine learning, like super cool people that are not finance related at all. And I've also had my own taste of entrepreneurship here. And I pitched a startup idea to Alexa Von Tobel, I've admired for years. I worked at a prop tech VC firm.
So who is she? Just to give some context.
She's an entrepreneur and venture capital investor. She sold LearnVest to Northwestern Mutual for $400 million. And so she's like someone I've just looked up to for a decade. And then like fast forward at Wharton, I'm pitching an idea to her. Like it's just such a cool experience that I wouldn't have gotten outside of Wharton. And I also think that the misunderstanding of Wharton students being like very sharp elbowed is not true. I've found that, you know, life happens, family members get sick, there's a loss, whatever it might be. I've gone through hard times and I've never felt alone here. My classmates have always stepped up and extremely kind and supportive, whether it's through losses or wins. I've found that it's an incredibly supportive community.
That's great. I mean, what about, while you're saying that, I thought about all the different campuses Wharton has. And that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. Like, how has that played out during the online portion and the non-online portion, right? Because you see like San Francisco, Beijing, like this is these are big new additions. How does that kind of work? And did you ever think of jumping to one of those campuses?
Yeah, I have a ton of friends that went to semester in San Francisco. And for myself, I'm from California. And so it didn't make a ton of sense. But I think for those individuals, what I was so shocked by was they did massive career pivots after that experience. Like I had a friend who wanted to go into finance and then he had spent a semester in San Francisco, now wants to do crypto startups, product management, like very if you want a totally different perspective change within the school year, it's being offered. And you can also receive that in smaller bites. I went on the Israel trek recently, and like, it was such a spiritual experience. So like these trips or semesters abroad, like they really help you just shake things up even during your 2 years.
Yeah. Is it pretty easy? Like, does it work where you can, is it only one, like the first semester, or is it both semesters you can go to San Francisco? How does that work?
Most people go in their first semester of their second year.
Got it. Okay.
And there is an application process, but like for the most part, if you want to go there, like the opportunity is there for you.
Got it. Very cool. All right. Last question for you. What do you wish more MBA applicants knew about in terms of school selection and making the right MBA investment, now that you're nearing the end of your journey?
I think just choosing the school where you will thrive the most. You want to be in an environment where it brings out the best in you, because ultimately this is going to impact the way that you network and interact with the communities at the university you're in. And it can also impact the direction of your recruiting efforts and career. So that's like the first thing that I wish I had known and MBA applicants had known. It all worked out for the best for myself, but I think like being more deliberate about like, where are you going to thrive the most? And then the second piece of advice I'd have is just like, this is a very special time to follow your passions. And so not losing sight of what it is that you want to do with your life. Like, I know a lot of people come to the MBA program to rest or party, which I do, but it's also a time to think about what impact you want to make in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thrive piece, right? Like, what do you think are some signals to thrive that someone who hasn't gone through that experience, like, could look at or think about? Besides, I mean, the first example that would come to my mind is like when I'm having coffee chats with, say, Wharton students or Wharton alumni, like, am I really getting along? Do I want to be a part of this family? Like, that would be a huge thrive signal for me, and one that I've encouraged on this podcast. Like, are there other ones, or is there a more nuanced take to what I just said?
I think that's like a very good way to figure out if you thrive there. Another one that I, in retrospect, have discovered is as you're writing the essays, if it's like a very easy essay to write about, like how are you going to use the resources to make what you want happen, it's probably a good fit. If you're like searching through the websites, you don't know, like I even stopped one of my applications midway because I just realized like, this isn't going to work. I'm searching for different resources to get me to where I want. And there aren't any alums that got there. Like it's just not a good fit. And so I think just being very honest with, is there a fit here?
I love that tip. I think so. I mean, and just to tie this whole thing full circle, where like the team-based interview was kind of fun for you. It was like, and you felt like you were benefiting from meeting all these people while you were applying to Wharton, and it's very clear, like you had a very clear plan. I like this idea of like following the energy of how you feel when you're actually going through the whole thing. That's a really good tip. Nicolle, this is a great conversation, and I'm sure so many people will benefit from like the very interesting ways you've gone about pursuing your goals and for going to business school and your career goals. So thank you so much for coming on the show and opening up, your experiences to the world. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Darren. It was great speaking.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Remember, you can get free school selection help and a profile review at touchmba.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just